Positivity rate and average weeks in.
Siyempre, magandang pag-aralan natin within the alert level 1 tungkol sa mga bata.
Vaccine czar Carlito Galvez Jr. has given his assurance that the country will have more than enough vaccine supply next year.
Kata yung naging relationship namin sa manufacturer, that it will be easier for us to procure for the boosters due first quarter po natin ng 2022. Wala na po tayong problema.
The Department of Health is now drafting guidelines for the administration of COVID-19 booster shots to senior citizens and the immunocompromised, who may not be able to maintain their immunity for as long as 6 months. Are the seniors also free to choose their own vaccines? We discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. I'm Robbie Alampay. With us online, Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star and Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5. Oh, Lucy, parang tayong dalawa pa lang pala, no?
Okay. Hi, Robbie. Okay, yeah.
So anong balita natin?
Well, I don't know kung narinig mo na yung latest.
Hmm.
Nag-speech daw si Pangulong Duterte sa NTF-L Cup sa Mindoro.
Oo nga.
At nagpahiwatig daw na may kumakandidato raw na nagko-cooking.
Oo. Pero walang pangalan eh. Di ba?
Wala eh.
May mga pahaging. Hindi naman
Parang
pwede.
gusto natin malaman, di ba? Ano ba yun?
May pahaging.
Sino na?
Oo, di ba? Ayaw mo naman pangunahan. Eh, hindi niya binigay yung pangalan. But he referred to, sabi niya, anak ng mayaman. He referred to yung
Sikat
tatay
ang
niya.
tatay.
Yung tatay. So, sabi niya, pwedeng
ang
manalo
dami
hands
nun.
down. Pwede manalo hands down, sabi niya. Pero bahala na raw kayo. But I think, syempre, as with President Duterte, pag-uusapan na naman niya ng mga tao.
Siyempre. Yan na naman ang laman ng Marites, sabi nga nila.
Sige. Anyway, sige. Susubaybayan na lang natin yan. Knowing how things work, we'll be getting trickles of information. Kukunin natin yan unti-unti. But in the meantime, sa ngayon, medyo mas buo yung mga pag-uusapan natin dito. Hopefully, a little more information to bite on and chew on. We begin tonight about COVID and about vaccines. We begin with vaccine expert panel head, Dr. Nina Gloriani. Good evening. Dr.
Good evening, ma'am.
Long time, ma'am.
Good evening, Robbie, Ma'am Lucy, sa inyong lahat.
Aba, nung huli namin kayong makausap, kulang-kulang pa ang supply ng drug. Ay, ng drug.
Ngayon, sobra-sobra.
Oo nga. Pero may vaccine hesitancy pa rin, ano?
Hindi, better naman na yung confidence ngayon with vaccines.
Ngayon,
Meron pa rin natatakot, pero...
Ma'am, I want to start kanina kasi sa the big story. May storya kami about, we've been talking about booster shots. Pero tama po ba yun? Meron, so there's a particular window na dapat tatamaan mo yung booster shots. May timing yun. There's such a thing as getting it too, we know that there's such a thing as getting it too late, but there's also such a thing as getting it too early?
Yeah, okay. You have made the recommendations based on general mga conclusions or data. No? Hindi po pwedeng sobra tayong specific to any particular either age group or timing kasi we have to consider everything. Hindi po pwedeng operationally. It will be very difficult. Okay. So sa ngayon, all of these vaccines na pinag-aralan namin, homologous or heterologous boosters, at least 6 months from the second dose, at least, pero earlier kung mga immunocompromised. And we have defined sino yung immunocompromised. Ito yung talaga moderately to severe immunocompromised. Meron pong definition under the DOH and the PISMIN.
Pero ano hong side effect, sabihin na lang natin, or possible adverse reactions kapag masyadong maagang magpa-booster?
No, actually, yung side effects, we're not so worried about that. So far, yung third doses or additional doses, although mas marami ang nagre-react doon sa heterologous boost, mild to moderate pa rin sila. Okay, so walang problem doon. Yung early, ang medyo, we do not want that kasi while, even yung sa first and second doses, we already explained that before. Pag too early, tataas nga agad, pero mabilis din bababa yung antibodies if we're just talking of antibodies. No? So the longer interval, and we saw this for AstraZeneca, yung longer interval actually yielded higher levels of antibody. And then with this boosting, ganun din yung data. Merong nagbigay ng 1 month after the second dose, may nagbigay ng 6 months, may nagbigay ng 12 months. So yung between 1 and wala kasi nung 3 months between 1 and 6 months, better yung 6 months na interval between the second and third doses.
Okay, but
So
Doc,
parang wala lang
Oo.
effect. Yeah.
But Doc, on a
Yeah.
practical level, therefore, what that means for all of us who are anxious and we're all, we're all checking kailan ba ako huling nagpabakuna, kailan ba ako magsi 6 months. At the same time, I mean, let's face it, some people have access to getting another dose, di ba? Ang point ko lang is, on a practical level, actually, mas mabuti wag na kayong magmadali. Parang wag na tayo mag-unahan. It actually makes more sense to wait.
Tama. No? Yes, that's right.
Okay.
So later, pero first in, first out tayo, no? We also have to sort of, those who have received the vaccine March, di ba March tayo nag-umpisa, March 1. So sila mauna, first
Yeah.
in, first out ba tawag doon? Yes.
No. Kasama na po
8
natin
months na tayo ngayon, 8 months na.
Oo.
Yes.
Oo, particularly mga frontliners tsaka
Yung
mga
health
immunocompromised,
workers, yes.
di ba? Kasama na po natin si Ami Pamintuan joining us from Manila at the Philippine Star.
Evening, Doctor.
Good evening.
Doctor, i-follow up ko lang yun kasi ang pinakamaraming nag-aalala, syempre yung mga nag-receive ng Sinovac. Although yun nga kasi yung pinakamarami din na i-administer natin. Ano yung maibibigay yung warning? Ako, marami na akong kilala na nag-Sinovac na nakakuha na ng booster, although hindi naman sila health
Bawal po yun.
workers, ha?
Bawal po. Bawal yun. Actually,
Pero ano yung masasabi nyo sa impact nun sa kanila? Kasi nag-aalala sila eh.
yung nauna na?
Yes.
Wala naman. Kaya lang bawal pa po yun eh. You know that the FDA only approved the amendment to the EUAs. Kasi yung EUAs, 2 doses lang ang allowed. So with the amendment, that allowed a 3rd dose or an additional dose. So technically, yung nabigyan noon, unofficial po yon. So kung nagkaroon sila ng side effects, hindi po sila mako-cover. Di ba? So doon sa mga parang indemnification. And I think hindi naman ganun ang nangyari because generally, yun nga sabi ko, even after a 3rd dose, yung mga vaccines na to, we're still very safe.
So kahit Sinovac, kahit Sinovac 6
Yes.
months, wait 6 months.
Yes. I'm taking a 3rd dose of Sinovac. I'm going to say that. Ako Sinovac kasi.
Okay.
Okay, but ma'am, given itong mga guidelines that people are looking at and we stress that our agencies are trying to base this on data and science, di ba? Pero clearly, it's important to discuss alin ang babagay, alin ang pwede, and so on. But does that, you feel, engender, again, not so much the hesitancy, but yung pagiging choosy ng mga tao and people being, holding out for whatever. Dati we used to say, the best vaccine is what's available. Ganin pa rin po ba yung prinsipyo ngayon?
Okay, ganito naman po. May supply issues din po tayo ngayon with the boosters. So, ang available right now ay Sinovac, Pfizer, and Moderna. Even Astra, we can give Astra pero kulang ang supplies ng Astra at this time. So, we also have to consider those. Hindi operationally yun, no? So, but we have made the recommendations as flexible as possible. So, kasi we were looking at data na you cannot really compare yung mga immunogenicity data nila head-to-head and we still do not have the correlates of protection. Kaya pag nakita natin nag-boost, nyari 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, okay na po yun. No? So nakita natin tumaas talaga with the 3rd dose. So hindi na natin iiba-ibahin pa sila. So general, kaya naging for all of these homologous, if you prefer the same brand for a 3rd dose, or heterologous if you want to change it, no? But there will be some people who will not, they have contraindications to another vaccine platform. So they may, to yung homologous na lang sila all throughout. And that's fine kasi yung especially for Sinovac, we have data on that. Yung third dose nila, maganda ang boosting effect.
But I also recall seeing a news item, I mean, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but ang impression ko is for AstraZeneca in particular, there's a recommendation that it has to be different. Tama po ba yung intindi ko doon?
And ganito yun, no? I have to explain that, medyo nagkaka-confusion dyan. These adenovirus vector-based vaccines, dalawa ang antibodies na napoproduce dyan. Antibodies against the vector, so yung adenovirus, and antibodies against the spike. Of course, we want the antibodies against the spike. Theoretically, and that is something that we actually submitted, theoretical possibility. Hindi ito based on actual data, no? Yung solid na data. But theoretically, when you give the same vector a third time, a fourth time, tumataas yung kanyang boosting effect do sa adeno. So you have more of the antibodies against the vector than against the spike. And you want the spike. So we call that attenuation of the immune response. Pero so far, the data showed us na hindi naman ganon. No? Theoretical lang yung basis namin, but we have to consider that kasi in immunology, meron po mga ganon. So siguro doon nagkalituhan kasi we had to include some of sa recommendations namin, some of these precautions. Pero it's very clear na yung ni-recommend namin, Astra, for instance, you can give Astra as a third dose, or those who may want the heterologous, kasi ito namang sa heterologous, there are sufficient data to show that. Sa UK, sa Europe, marami po silang studies, Astra, Pfizer, Astra, Moderna. And mas mataas po talaga yung boosting effect after a heterologous boosting. Pero okay pa rin yung homologous, ha? Huwag kayong ano doon.
Actually, pa-iba-iba, Dok. Iba naman sinasabi, mas maganda raw ng homologous, mas safe. So parang meron ka pa rin wini-worry na safety factor, no? Meron naman nagsasabi nga na mas malakas daw pagka yung heterologous. So actually, as in many things about COVID, no?
Yeah.
Ang daming mga conflicting information na hindi rin namin malaman as laymen kung ano ba talagang maganda. So if we're going to be given a choice now, we're hearing different information.
Yes,
actually.
because there are many data sets. Maraming studies ongoing. So iba-ibang klaseng tao yung ginawa ng study, medyo iba yung data nila. No? But we're really looking at safety and immunogenicity or yung efficacy. No? Doon sa safety, I already said na kung nauna na kayo doon sa isang Sinovac, and you did not have much reaction doon, ibig sabihin very safe for you yon, you may opt to get that as a third time kasi baka you may have contraindications to the heterologous like me. I may have contraindications to yun sa mga adenovectors kasi meron silang rare possibility of yung mga blood clots. And marami akong sakit na pwede ako doon, kaya hindi ko siya talaga gagawin. Okay. So there are such considerations. Hindi siya general na, pwede ka doon, pwede hindi po ganon. So we have to consider pag may mga sakit, comorbidities, or may mga conditions yung patients na ano. But generally, yung ating recommendations, hindi po pwede isa-isa. But those who have some comorbidities may have to ask their attending physicians.
Final na ho ba yung third booster na yan? Or is it just going to be the start of a series of boosters from now on?
Now, we will also, hindi naman talagang debating, but all over the world, pinag-uusapan na ano bang tawag talaga? Third dose? Kasi pag sinabi natin third dose, yung primary, 1, 2, saka 3, primary yung 3. Ibig sabihin, yun yung parang polio, 3, no? Di ba? Binibigyan natin sa polio. Sa hepatitis B, 3. Yun ang primary series niya. And then the boosters, after the primary series, will come in months or even years later. So, hindi pa clear yun at this time. So, in fact, we were in a meeting earlier, No, pinag-uusapan namin, ito ba tatawagin nating third dose or additional dose or booster?
Booster.
For now, interchangeable sila eh. Pero ang talagang tinatawag ng WHO na additional dose is part of a primary series. So pag sinabi natin sa immunocompromised, bibigyan siya ng additional dose. Kasi the immunocompromised, mababa yung kanyang immune response doon sa 2 doses. So he or she has to be given a third dose to complete that. Hopefully, baka hindi pa rin, depende kung very severely immunocompromised, that primary may not be just 3 doses. It could be 4, pero generally it would be 3. So yun po. And then yung booster is pag na-receive nyo na yung first 2, okay naman yung response, nag-wane lang because of time, yung mga ganon, you're otherwise normal, pero ibuboost lang, ipapataas lang ulit to reach a level of protection that you need. Although wala pa correlates talaga na clear sa COVID. Pero meron na tayo ngayon parang, ano ba to, value. Meron silang arbitrary values ng antibodies that will be required for protection. Pero hindi pa yun masyadong definite at this time. Pero meron na tayo kahit pa pa.
Doctor, meron pa rin isang area of confusion ngayon, ano? Pediatric vaccination has started, pero yung policy, national government policy on minors going outdoors, medyo magulo. Ngayon, Cebu City, binawal ang mga bata up to, I think, 15 and below sa groceries and supermarkets.
Oh. Kasi ganito,
Sa
no?
Paranaque, sa mall, bawal.
Kaya iba-iba eh. Ano ba yung, may nag-firm up na bang policy on that, certain age groups?
Actually, I'm not very clear about that. Ang LGU po kasi, they have the option to, meron silang parang right to actually, not dictate, but make those parang policies outside of the IATF, for instance. No? But ako, I would agree with yung limiting yung labas pa ng mga bata. They have not been vaccinated. At least doon sa mga areas outside of, NCR only has 92% coverage. Only NCR. And the rest, hindi ganon. I think nasa 40, I don't know about Cebu or Davao. Pero yung mga ibang regions that I know of, nasa 30, wala pa nga 40%. That means, assuming lang na ganun kasimple ang pag-compute dyan, 30% ang vaccinated, 70% ang hindi. 70% yung possibly magdadala pa rin ng virus. So, if you mingle with those people, they will get the infection. And children have no vaccine yet.
Pero up to what age ang i-recommenda nyo? Kasi syempre, even the LGUs, they want guidelines from the national government kasi sila yung may access sa experts, di ba? Health experts.
Opo. IATF po yan. Mahirap po magsalita on my side. IATF. Actually, marami pong mga experts na kinoconsult ang IATF. It's very also tricky, no? Pero mag-ingat na lang po.
Ay, Doktora, kasama doon sa pag-iingat or at least trying to anticipate because people want to get a sense na may control ako dito eh. Diba? And sa totoo lang, the only thing we can control is, like we said kanina, get your vaccine card, tingnan mo kung kailan yung second dose mo, then people can start counting. Maybe yun, pwede mo control yung pagbibilang mo. But other than that, I imagine some people might be tempted to say na maybe there's a way to check kung nag-wane na yung bakuna ko. Is there a way to check? And should we even be thinking of how to actively monitor ourselves?
No, okay. Kasi the antibody tests available, although quantitative, are not really validated for vaccine-induced immunity. Validated sila doon sa natural immunity, yung convalescent plasma especially. No? But having said that, okay din naman kasi we have yung mga medyo really good tests like yung Abbott, I think meron pang iba, mga Roche, na pwede naman. Pero we do not really recommend it for everyone. Actually, we made a recommendation for yung mga physicians that are taking care of the really immunocompromised, moderately, severely immunocompromised, that they may actually test itong mga pasyente na to. But it's not for the general population. Hindi po, that will not help much. Magkakagulo lang po yan. Ito, wala ako, mayroon. Ito, ang dami kong antibody. Then it will be very confusing. only for the moderately to severely immunocompromised po yung aming recommendation. And with very
Doc?
specific tests.
Yeah. Yeah. Doc, matanong ko lang, yung molnupiravir, di ba, nag-apply na ng
EUA.
EUA.
Mm.
So pag na-approve yun yung ba sa tingin nyo will it take the place of the vaccine? I mean, over the long run.
It's for the sick. It's for mild to moderate. Hindi siya for prevention. You know, ang vaccines ay prevention, prophylaxis. So and it will stay longer, no? So ibig sabihin like ganito, maybe you may take more yung drug, then you got well, then you don't have vaccine, you can get the infection again. Ganun yun, no? So it will not address the more long term.
But then they will argue that the vaccines also don't prevent
but they will
infection,
prevent
no?
against severe.
Yeah, pero sa molnupiravir, pag mild ka, at least
Magaling.
merong assurance yun na hindi ka magiging serious or critical.
Yes, pero treatment pa rin yun Treatment yun. Treatment yung mga antivirals, hindi sila preventive.
Pero yung molnupiravir, it works early detection. It's here na, it's in the Philippines.
Early.
Dinala ng Ayala. It works only kung early detection. No? Kasi I'm asking, kasi marami nagtatanong ngayon, paano kung magka-breakthrough infection ako? How do you differentiate between ordinary fever or cold, for example, and the breakthrough infection? Kailan kami pupunta para naman magkaroon kami ng early treatment?
Okay. Yung mga tao ay, of course, they have, if they feel something, actually yun ang nagiging parang issue ngayon with these Delta variants na iba ang mga symptoms. Yung parang, alam natin yung symptoms for COVID, no? Yung mawawalan ka ng panlasa, pangamoy, and may fever, but some do not have that with these new variants now. So, but anything that you feel na hindi mo usually na-feel, yung ang advice namin is you consider being tested. Kasi hindi natin masabi, I have a friend who wala siya naramdaman, kundi nawalan lang siya ng ganang kumain. COVID pala. Yung mga ganon. So they have to know themselves and then consult, actually mag-seek agad ng consult and for testing kung kailangan.
Kahit yung fully vaccinated doctor, kasi may mga breakthrough, di ba?
Yes. Especially among may mga comorbidities and the elderly, of course.
Hey, Doctora, just to manage my own expectations, and I imagine a lot of people, gaya ng tanong nga ni Lucy, a lot of people are monitoring itong molnupiravir na to, di ba? Para todo safety na. But at the same time, dalawa yung balitang lalabas di ba? Naiangkat na, dumating na, may stock na dito. At the same time, there's an application for an EUA. It's going to be distributed. Set the scene for us to be realistic and so that everybody understands. Hindi po ibig sabihin nito na pwede nang bilhin sa butika to, no? This will be limited access and therefore kung makakita kayo sa mga online stores may nagbubudol sa inyo, budol-budol yan. Most likely, hindi totoo yan.
Ano yan? Prescription drug yan. Kahit siya may EUA, prescription po yan.
Okay. So but when you say prescription, does that mean that
Doctor.
any doctor can give that prescription and you can get access to it, or are there limited hospitals also initially lang na pwedeng mag-ano niyan, mag-reseta
I'm
niyan?
not sure about that. Yung EUA po kasi pwedeng like the vaccines, may EUA available sa government, no? Pero ito hindi ako po masyadong clear kung sino talaga. Kasi yung sinasabi niyong, kunwari, which hospital, yun more ang mga compassionate use. Medyo iba po yun. So maybe we should ask FDA. Ano talaga?
Okay. Okay. Dr. Nina Gloriani, she's head of the Vaccine Expert Panel. Ma'am, maraming salamat po.
Sige,
Thank you, Doc.
You take care.
Okay.
Bye.
You too.
Please stay with us. The Chiefs will be right back. Welcome back, the Chiefs here on One News. Now joining us is Professor Guido David of Octa Research. Good evening, Professor David.
Evening,
Evening,
Professor.
Professor.
Hi, good evening everyone. Robbie, Lucy, Ami.
Hey, Prof, alam nyo naman, every time you're here at wala si Professor Rai, we brace ourselves for for a lot of good news. Ito lang naman, di ba? The numbers have been going down, but is there anything to qualify?
Actually, I don't think I have anything to qualify kasi the numbers are looking good. Positivity rate natin in NCR is 3%. And kanina I was presenting in sa Laging Handa. And what I mentioned was, hindi lang naman sa Metro Manila, but all over the country. For example, Cebu has a positivity rate of 1%. Cavite has a positivity rate of 1%. Hindi lang sila, Rizal, Bulacan, Davao del Sur, Laguna, 3% positivity rate. So the numbers are looking good all over the country. And yun nga, sa NCR, 3%. Last year, hindi tayo nagkaroon ng 3% positivity rate ever since we started testing. So this is the first time. So it's not just the numbers.
So,
And yung
Prof,
70 average,
Prof, because you're quoting rate, because you're quoting positivity rate, does that mean that even the concerns of people na kulang naman tayo ng testing, even that therefore is negated because we're basing it off of rate anyway?
Yes, it's the testing positivity rate. So it means
Yes.
we have enough testing. Bakit? Kasi if you don't have enough testing, that your positivity rate will go higher. Kasi konti lang tinetest mo, that means more of the people you test will be positive. Pero it's a rate, and we're not testing less. Kasi compared to last year, we're testing 37% more. So actually, yung sinasabi nilang, it's. I mean, yeah, I can understand some people are medyo skeptic about the good numbers. I mean, even my friend Professor Rantis is always skeptical about the good numbers. Yeah, some people are skeptical kasi the rate of decrease was so fast. We can attribute that naman to the vaccination kasi we have a lot of vaccinations sa Metro Manila, and not just in Metro Manila, we're vaccinating people all over the country.
This is particularly good news because this is coming at a time when we've already loosened quite considerably compared to just, let's say, 2 or 3 weeks ago, no? So are you really believe that this can be attributed to the rate of vaccination? Yun na yun? And does this mean that we can feel safe about the further loosening of restrictions?
Well, if we look at other countries, once they achieved a high level of vaccination, they were able to manage the cases. We can feel safe up to a certain point. And ito yung mga natin. Siyempre, may mga disclaimers pa rin tayo. In many other countries, nangyari, once they have achieved a level of vaccination and the control nila cases, they just reopened and removed almost all restrictions, pati face mask mandate, which we are not going to remove. Pero what happened in those countries, nagkaroon ng resurgence, particularly sa unvaccinated and sa minors. And that's why concern natin yung mga unvaccinated and yung mga minors. And that's why hindi pa natin aalis din yung face mask mandate, even though the numbers are looking good. Yes, we know some people are not wearing their face masks properly, pero I mean, it's still relatively a small percentage of people. Pero if everyone stops wearing face masks like what they do in some countries, we will probably see a spike or a surge in cases, lalo na if children are going out and they're not vaccinated.
Well, in the good news, now the concern is sustainability. Can you project if this is sustainable beyond, for example, January? Kasi last year, nag-surge tayo starting March, di ba? And we are seeing in other countries, meron din silang surge. Kasama ba yun sa mga projections nyo? Is it possible?
Yes, of course. If we, ang projection natin, if we continue our mandates naman, yung minimum public health standards, and then we continue vaccinating yung mga unvaccinated, and we start vaccinating yung mga 12 to 17 kasi approved na sila for vaccine. And then perhaps giving booster shots, which is already being rolled out. Kasi these are some of the threats that we have. I mean, that we saw in other countries. Ang mga threats, removing the face mask and the public health standards, not vaccinating enough people. I mean, this happens in some countries like the U.S. In some Republican states, medyo political siya, so they don't get vaccinated. And then syempre yung children not yet vaccinated, this also happened. And then some say na yung boosters, yung vaccines have waning efficacy after 6 to 8 months. There are studies na nag-decrease yung antibody levels. Of course, it doesn't correlate directly na pag nag-decrease yung antibody level, it means na decreased yung immunity natin. Pero if we have enough vaccines, and inapproved na rin naman, then why not give booster shots when they're available? Besides, what I heard is may mga vaccines na medyo malapit na mag-expire. So why not use up all the vaccines in whatever way is optimal?
Well, since the children are not vaccinated, is there a big risk kung i-expand yung in-person classes? They're hoping by January, malaki-laki na yung expansion.
Well, ako for sure, I support, definitely college kasi I'm a college professor. So they should be They should be mostly vaccinated. Yung 12 to 17, we're starting to vaccinate them. So kunyari, mga high school and senior high school, I don't have a problem with that. Yung mga below 12, I understand siguro there will be significant concern from many parents, especially since hindi pa sila vaccinated. So ako, I'm on the fence on that. Although I want face-to-face classes to resume, we have to admit now there will be some level of risk if the 11 and below start resuming classes. Ngayon, I understand. I don't want to, overstep my boundaries with the Department of Education, since I assume that they did their due diligence sa face-to-face classes in terms of ano mga protocols nila. I think may time limit din naman. But I personally think if we have to get back to it, pwedeng medyo hybrid muna. May parang blended, like partly face-to-face, partly online. Ako mismo, I'm planning to do that when classes resume next year. Medyo hybrid muna. Some things na kailangan face-to-face, especially exams, kasi may magbigay ng online exams, that would be face-to-face. Pero some things na, lecture lang naman, pwede naman sigurong online.
What about incoming foreign tourists as well as returning Filipinos? I know there's a proposal to at least bring down the self-quarantine in quarantine facilities to 1 to 2 days. I was speaking with somebody from Cambodia earlier today, and he was saying, in Cambodia, we've already lifted the requirement for quarantine in facilities. So I imagine there's going to be that pressure as well as we try to reopen the economy and tourism. What impact might that have? And are we at that point that we can also start taking on that risk of lowering the barrier for international tourism and returning Filipinos in particular?
Yeah, I think we can. I think we're at the point now we can start taking some risks there as well. A lot of countries are in the green now or even yellow, meaning yung relative risk nila is actually very low. Siguro we just have to be a bit more cautious sa mga countries, especially in Europe where they're having surges, Russia and maybe Singapore, and I think South Korea is starting to have a surge again. We can just be a bit more careful yung protocols for certain countries, and then we can require yung usually what they do is require tests prior to travel. Kasi dati hindi natin nire-require. Some countries require it. Tayo, we didn't require tests prior to travel or prior to boarding their flight. So that's one thing that we can require. And then we can reduce quarantine for vaccinated people. For unvaccinated, maybe we can use the same quarantine. So yung naman, we can assume the risk because the assumption is these people are vaccinated and if they test negative, then their relative risk is lower.
What frame would you give a certain loosening of a restriction? For example, right now we're allowing 50% capacity, no? Is it possible to lock in the restrictions or the loosening of restrictions with the performance indicators? For example, the number of active cases or the number of cases or the positivity rate, so that we can kind of like also predict na, nako, tumataas yung numbers. Baka kailangan bumalik tayo sa 50% or sa 30%. Is that possible, just moving forward, so that it becomes second nature to us to know na, oops, masyado tayong nagiging loose. We're not even observing the physical distancing anymore, no? When you look at the transport sector, for example. So is there a way to lock that so that they're in step with each other?
Yeah, actually, Lucy, kami, we sa Okta, we go with certain criteria, which is based on COVID Act now, which was developed in the U.S. So we looked at it and gave a framework then that we use for the country. But this is not the same as the criteria used by the DOH and the IATF. They have a different criteria. And as you know, we've been working with the Go Negosyo Group for some time now, and they actually will be using our own criteria to assess yung risk levels. So, kunyari, masasabi natin na this region, this municipality is low risk or moderate risk or high risk based on 4 criteria. Ginagamit namin yung reproduction number, yung positivity rate, yung healthcare utilization, and then the daily attack rate, which is yung basically the concentration of cases. So yun, and then based on that, may idea kami na, okay, pag tumaas ito, pero pag tumaas yung isa lang indicator, usually it's not enough na tataas na agad yung, let's say, alert level, right? Pero usually, maybe 2 indicators or 3, pag tumaas sila, mahahatak na yung alert level. And you could go from low to moderate, kasi right now we're saying low risk yung Metro Manila. Then once we go to moderate, we can scale back some of the capacities or move back some of the restrictions, magiging mas strict. So yun yung basis namin.
Yes, I guess my question, let me rephrase it, no, is parang how often do you need to grade yourself in terms of, the loosening? I mean, for example, right now we're at alert level 3. How do you know that you can move forward further? Is that just pakiramdaman lang? Ganun? Let's see.
We do it possibly every week or every 2 weeks, and then we take all these indicators, so yung positivity rate, etc. So i-calculate namin, okay, this is equivalent to alert level 3 or alert level. I mean, at least that's how we would do it. I'm not sure how. I think may metrics sila ginagamit. Based on what I heard sa sinabi ng Department of Health, meron din silang kasama sa criteria yung level of vaccination. So we need to have 70% fully vaccinated of the target to get to alert level 1. So meron silang mga barriers for alert level 1. Pero for alert level 1 yun. Pero how do we move back from alert level 1 to 2? It must assume na tumataas yung cases and tumataas yung positivity rate and tumataas yung hospital utilization.
What about death rate?
Yes, sir.
What about death rate? I mean, what
Ay,
are
oo
we
nga,
what are we
bakit
seeing there?
tumataas yun?
Yeah, we actually have a theory for that. May nakita kaming something sa data. We're gonna release that as a white paper siguro within the next few days. But the answer is basically a lot of it is backlogged deaths. So kumbaga lumang deaths sila
Underreported before.
Yes, nare-report lang siya.
Okay, so it is
Some of
not
them-
it is not
Or
an
baka long
indication.
COVID.
It's not an indication of either long COVID, and it's also not an indication of, for example, deaths outside of NCR where it's possible that the facilities are not as adequate as in the urban areas?
Actually, Robbie, most of the deaths, just mga recent deaths, most of them are outside the NCR and in the provinces. So, totoo yung sinasabi mo. And because our survey mismo sa Okta Research, we surveyed people in Visayas and Mindanao, and there was significant vaccine hesitancy pa rin in many rural areas in the provinces. So, there's some kind of correlation na yung medyo mataas yung vaccine hesitancy, possibly hindi siya direct correlation, but we're postulating na there is a relationship between that kasi sa NCR mababa yung death rate na nakikita natin.
Okay.
Professor, beyond the Christmas shopping crowding, the longer term concern is the conduct of the campaign for the elections. Ilang buwan pa yan, pero ngayon pa lang nag-umpisa na, nakikita na natin. Talagang crowding, meron ding walang mask. Saka, you can see that many protocols are being ignored. Anong discussion sa Okta about this? Is this a high-risk situation?
Well, Amy, I mean, nung nakita ko yung filing sa mga COC, parang ang daming tao. I mean,
Parang wala ng pandemic.
Parang wala ng pandemic. Parang dinadumog yung mga sasakyan. Parang may celebrity na yung dinadumog. But, well, so far we're not seeing a spike in cases despite some events. So I think I could probably say na the vaccines are working kasi siguro kung last year ito nangyari, na wala pang vaccinated and we're having events like that, makikita natin may spikes in cases. Pero ngayon, we're not seeing spikes in cases. I mean, of course, it doesn't mean na safe na lahat. I mean, it just means na maybe the risk is lower, pero it doesn't mean na hindi mangyari yung magkakaroon ng spike in cases. Diba? I mean, when we talk about risk, it's something na it could happen, pero if you do it over and over again, the risk will add up and baka makakita tayo ng super spreader events. But the good news is the cases are going down. So if our projections are correct, na baka bumaba na siya to 1,000 daily by end of November and maybe even down to 500 by Christmas sa buong country. By that time, the risk will be so low na we won't be worried about large events.
So pwede
na mag-meet sa De Gallo. Pwede na mag-Nazareno. Kasi bago magkampanya, yun muna pagdadaanan natin.
Well, ayoko ng pangunahan. I mean, baka sabihin nila, pinapangunahan ko yung decision ng government. But I mean, we can
baka magalit na naman sa'yo. Lagot.
Pero the point is that the risk will be much lower. Ibig sabihin, if events like that happen, tapos mababa yung cases, the risks will be lower. So we're talking about risk analysis.
Is there any way to, because kanina lang, and every night we're talking about booster shots, we're talking about waning efficacy. People are starting to count 6 months from their last shots. Will that eventually be a factor? The waning efficacy, and as people are ironically encouraged to go out?
Well, that could be a factor. We can't say that it's not a factor, but how much of a factor it is. I mean, the truth is yung mga data natin, it's not, I mean, there's a correlation between waning efficacy and, I mean, they're correlating it with reduction in antibodies. Hindi naman tayo nagtetest ng antibodies regularly. I haven't tested my antibodies. So we have to parang just assume na it's something that will happen. It's not, it's not absolutely necessary, pero I mean, to get a booster shot.
Can you track that now? Is that showing up in the data, whether or not the people getting infected got their shots at a particular time? Are we starting to, and are you capable of tracking that?
We don't have the data for that yet, unfortunately. So maybe pag may data na, we can track that. I mean, right now we're not getting a surge naman. Napansin nila yun sa, for example, sa Israel, nagkaroon ng spike in cases, and ang theory nila is it's related to reduced efficacy. Tapos na-correlate nila, okay, naka 6 months na, this is a possible explanation. But again, these are all scientific studies na, I mean, based on limited data. So that's a theory na, after 6 to 8 months, mag-reduce yung efficacy, and it may cause a spike in cases. Actually, yung nagsabi niya na it might cause a spike in cases is my colleague, si Father Nick. So, but it's a theory naman. It doesn't mean it's guaranteed to happen. And iba-iba na rin naman yung behavior ng vaccines. I think it's established for mRNA vaccines na yun nga, mga 6 to 8 months, nagde-decrease na yung antibody levels. I'm not sure if it's well established sa, for example, sa Sputnik or sa similar sa AstraZeneca yata, mas matagal yata mag-wane. I'm not sure, but I'm just saying this based on the data that I have seen.
A few months ago, you also talked about observing a cycle in a surge, no? That you didn't quite know how to put a finger on, because you were saying parang surges kind of like follow a cycle. We don't know whether it's a lifespan of a variant or are you seeing that at work now at all?
Yes, we're seeing that. Kaya nga confident kami na we're not going to have a major surge because we're not seeing a new variant yet that is as destructive as the Delta. Ang binabantayan natin yung AY 4.2, which is a Delta lineage variant. Kumbaga, you can call it a Delta plus variant. Pero most of it is nasa UK. So, and it's not, so far what we're seeing is it's not that much different from the Delta variant. So, based on this theory na may lifespan, yung surge, so dahil tapos na tayo sa Delta, ang theory natin, hindi na tayo magkakaroon ng major surge ng Delta. That's the theory.
Delta.
Yes, we could have a resurgence,
a new
spike
one
in cases with the Delta, pero mostly yung mga unvaccinated. Pero that's why we still have to be careful with children, and we have to be careful with wearing face masks for them. Pero generally, we're not so afraid of another surge with the Delta. Ngayon, kung may bagong variant na nakita ng variant of concern, then we will be concerned na naman. Babalik na naman si Ranjit dito calling for a lockdown. Okay, let's pag may Omega variant na mag-call for a lockdown.
Professor, by any chance, are you looking at our neighbors? By any chance, what's happening in Vietnam?
Yeah, may theory din dyan si Father Nick. And that's why we're not super concerned in mangyayari yan sa Philippines. Yung things like places like sa Vietnam, na nagkakaroon ng parang they're having difficulty controlling.
Yeah, they're at 9,000 today. 9,000 this week, di ba?
Right. They're having difficulty controlling the Delta variant because it's still the Delta variant. The reason we think is that Vietnam has been good from preventing surges before. Na nakalusot yung Delta variant, they didn't have the resilience pa. Tayo, we had the resilience kasi kumbaga na tayo, parang veteran na tayo sa surges. Tinamaan na tayo ng last year yung B1 variant and then yung earlier this year yung Alpha and then yung Beta variant. So nung tumama na yung Delta variant, parang na tayo, kumbaga parang weathered na tayo. So our guess is there's significant natural immunity aside from vaccination, and that is already protecting us in a way.
When you say weathered na tayo, you're talking about, as you said, resistance and resilience within ourselves, biologically, physiologically, or are you referring to the systems that we had in place? What exactly do you mean? No.
Well, partly siguro in the systems, but mostly I think biologically as a population, parang na tayo, parang mas resilient na tayo. Pag nagka-surge tayo, yes, cases are rising, hospitals are getting filled up. Pero roughly we know how to manage it, and then parang I think we've already beaten Delta variant. So if spikes happen, it will be smaller scale. I don't think we will have 10,000 cases. I don't think we will have 5,000 cases again unless a new variant comes in na talagang major threat. So right now, I'm not super worried about yung elections, or even Christmas caroling, yes, we should still, I mean, we're not out of the woods yet. We should still practice safety measures. Pero in terms of large surge tulad na nakita natin na we'll get to 20,000 cases, parang I think that's in the past right now. That's the theory. That's not a word of truth, but that's our theory.
Professor, what about vaccine hesitancy? Okta came out with a survey showing na bumaba na yung vaccine hesitancy. What more can be done to persuade people to get their shots based on what the result of the survey? What came up?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's still a lot of information campaign, especially sa provinces. And ang sabi nila, this is mainly the task of the local governments there to get their people vaccinated. Alam ko may talks about mandating vaccination or requiring it in workplaces. Ako naman, I'm for freedom of choice. So ako personally, I support not forcing people to get vaccinated, but convincing them and advising them of the benefits of vaccination and the fallacies na, okay, to fake news to na hindi naman nakakamatay yung vaccines. So stuff like that. Pero I also think na certain sectors should be with certain sectors we should highly recommend vaccination. Kaya sa contact sports, if they're starting to bring that back, I would think na it should be required for sa basketball players. I think they should be vaccinated kasi there's significant risk to close contact. Besides, kumbaga, if you don't want to get vaccinated, then he can't play. Parang ganun.
Okay. Professor Guido David of Okta Research. Sir, maraming salamat po.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you.
And that's all for this edition of The Chiefs. We hope what was discussed here will keep the conversation going. Before we go, a reminder to our viewers, mask on, wash hands, and stay safe, Philippines. I'm Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Paminton of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5, and we are One News.